let's talk about probability and impact matrix, which we earlier talked as a tool for qualitative risk analysis. It is subjective, but it is quick and easy to use. Two things again here is, what is the probability of an event, what is the chance of an good or bad thing happening, and if that particular risk happen, what will be the potential impact of that. These two things are analyzed in probability and impact matrix. So what we do in probability and impact matrix? We said there are two things. One is the probability of happening a thing, and second is impact of that. There are various approaches used by organizations. Let's look at those. So one way of doing that would be identifying each risk, probability and impact on the scale of 1 to 9. So 1 will be low probability and 9 will be high probability. So if probability is very rare, then you assign number 1 for that. If there is a very high probability, more or less that's going to happen, then you assign a probability of 9. Similarly for the impact, if the impact is minimum, then you assign 1 for the impact, and if impact of that is disastrous, then you assign number 9 for the impact. So you assign 1 to 9 for both probability and impact. Instead of 9, some companies have 5-point system, some companies could have 3-point system. So you assign 1 to 5, or you could assign from 1 to 3, both for probability and for the impact. And the risk score is then calculated by multiplying these two numbers. So the risk score will be probability multiplied by the impact of that. So for example, earlier as we said, if an event has a very low probability, then you assign number 1 to that. And if the impact of that is very minimum, then you assign the impact value as a 1. So once you calculate the score of that, that will be 1 multiplied by 1. So the risk score will be 1 for this particular example which we talked. On the other hand, if a incidence or if a event is definitely going to happen, then you are going to assign a probability of 9 to that, because that event is more or less going to happen. And you will assign a rating of 9 for the impact if it is going to be very severe impact. So in this particular case, you assign a rating of 9 for impact also in this particular example. So in that extreme example, we will have a risk rating of 9 multiplied by 9 is equal to 81. So we talked about two extreme examples where there was a very low probability and very low impact, and we reached as a risk score of 1. And then there was another event which had a very high probability and a very severe impact, where we had a risk score of 81. So that's how the risk score is calculated. So here we have another example of risk score. Here the event in this particular example is a low probability event. There is very less chance of happening that. So the score for probability is 1, because it is a low probability event. But in this particular example, the impact of that event is very severe. It's not supposed to happen, but if it happens, it is going to have a very severe impact of that. So it will have a very severe impact on the objective. So, excuse me. So in that case, the impact value is assigned as a 9. So the risk score is probability multiplied by impact, so is equal, which is 1 multiplied by 9 is equal to 9. So this was another example of calculating risk score. So here we have a sample table to calculate probability. How do we calculate probability? As we said, if there is very low chance, then the probability number is 1. And if there is very high chance, then assigned number is 9. So if you remember, we earlier talked about different sort of numbering systems used by organizations. Some use from 1 to 9, some organizations use 1 to 5, and some organizations use 1 to 3. So in this particular example, we are talking of an organization which is using number 1 to 9 on the scale of 1 to 9. So anything which has a high probability is assigned number 9 for the probability, and any event which is there is very little chance of happening, that is assigned as a number 1. Similarly, we will talk about the impact also on the next slide. On the previous slide, we talked about probability. We analyzed probability on the scale of 1 to 9. Similarly, let us look at the impact of the risk. And impact also, we will assign a number from 1 to 9. And as I said earlier, this is just an example, and your company, your organization might have a different numbering system. But in this particular example, we picked up a case where the probability and the impact is assigned a number from 1 to 9. So let us look at the impact table. Impact to what? Impact to the objective of the organization. So in this particular sample table which we have, it is related to a project which wants to maintain its cost, which wants to maintain its schedule, its scope, and its quality. So those are the objectives of the project. The project wants to meet these objectives, these 4 objectives. So anything which is affecting these objectives is a risk. So if we look at from very low to very high, let's say cost. If the particular risk does not affect the cost or has a very insignificant effect on the cost, then it is number 1. Similarly, on the other hand, if the impact on the project is more than 40% of the cost, then it is assigned as number 9. And once again, this is part of risk planning, the first step, where you define all these numbers. What is the type of risk the company wants to take? Those are fixed there itself as a part of planning for the risk management. So this table would have been made as a part of planning for the risk management. Now coming to other objectives, schedule. If there is a very insignificant impact on the schedule, it is assigned as a number 1. And similarly, as we move further here, more impact on schedule, the bigger number it gets. So if it's more than 20% impact on schedule, it is assigned as number 9. Whether it's 20% or 40% or 80%, that is what you have to decide when you finalize your plan. Similarly, on scope and quality. So as things get worst, from numbers changes from 1 to 9. So as the impact is bigger, the bigger is the number. So 9 is the highest impact and 1 is the lowest impact. So what do we do once we have identified the impact and the probability? So if the probability is high, impact is high, that means the risk is high. There is a high chance of risk happening and the impact of that will be high. So this is where we have divided our risks into 4 bigger clauses. If it's a high impact and high probability, it is red. So these risks definitely you should be attending to, because there is a big chance of these things happening, and if they happen, the impact of that will be significant. So high impact, high probability here are shown in the red box. Going on just on the opposite side, if it's a low probability risk and low impact risk, that means there is very rare chance of happening, and even if it happens, it's not going to significantly impact the objective of the organization. So those are low risks. So low impact, low probability will be low risk. Just going to the extremes of the number, like if this was a low impact, we would have assigned this as a number 1. and if it's a low probability, we would have assigned this as a number 1. So 1:1 is equal to 1. So the risk rating would have been 1. Similarly, if it was very significant impact, we would have assigned number 9 to that, and the same way we would have assigned number 9 to the probability also. So 9 multiplied by 9 is equal to 81. So these are two extremes of risk rating. Anything in between these would fall under these categories, which are yellow. So either the probability is low or the impact is low. Those are shown as yellow boxes. So these yellow boxes you probably might attend to, or maybe you will just keep an eye on these type of risks and see need based when you need to take action on that or not. Green one, probably you will just ignore for the time being because these are low value risk, low probability risk. So you probably will ignore that. Red one, definitely you will attend to those things first. So that is the whole purpose of analyzing risk. So by analyzing risk, we put it into sort of 3 different categories. So the areas where we must take action, areas which we can ignore for the time being, or areas where you keep eye on those and take action as and when need arises. So the previous slide was a simplified version, and this one has a little bit more detail. Depending on the risk rating, you put a number, and as we earlier said, number 81, which was 9 multiplied by 9, which was high probability and high impact. These are defined as 81. So the rating here is 81, and just on the opposite side, if it's a low impact and low probability, that would have assigned number 1. So anything in this green area, probably you will ignore for the time being, or you will just ignore that. Yellow one, you will keep eye on those risks and take action as and when need arises. But the red one, definitely you will immediately take action and plan for the action, monitor those, control those actions. This is another example of a matrix. Here, instead of assigning number 1 to 9, a particular organization has defined the impact and the probability as on the scale of 5, from very low to very high. So this is just another example, and based on that, the risk, overall risk, is identified as high, medium or low.